Gunfire shattered the crystal chandeliers of the Pierre Hotel, raining glass onto the blood-stained marble. Amidst the screaming crowd, New York's most ruthless syndicate leader shoved his trembling bride behind his tailored suit. She was only meant to be a contract, but tonight she became his reason to kill. Natalie Reed stared at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of the penthouse overlooking Central Park. The woman staring back was a stranger. She was draped in a bespoke emerald silk gown from Oscar de la Renta, her throat wrapped in millions of dollars of Cartier diamonds. But beneath the glittering facade, she was nothing more than collateral, a piece of property purchased to settle a debt. Her brother Oliver had always been reckless, but racking up a $3 million gambling debt at an underground casino run by the Costa Syndicate was a death sentence. The Costas didn't forgive debts. They extracted them in blood. Natalie had prepared herself for the worst when the men in suits kicked down their apartment door 3 weeks ago. Instead of a bullet, she was met with a contract handed to her by a man who made the Costas look like street thugs. Dominic Russo. Dominic was the undisputed head of the Russo family, a man whose legitimate front as a billionaire real estate developer barely masked his iron-fisted control over the eastern seaboard's underworld. He was devastatingly handsome, coldly calculating, and utterly terrifying. And he had a problem. The old-school Italian Commission, the shadowy governing body of the 5 families, refused to let him take full control of the national syndicate unless he settled down. They wanted stability. They wanted a family man, not a rogue bachelor with a trail of dead enemies. So Dominic paid Oliver's debt to the Costa family in full, effectively saving his life. In exchange, Natalie was to become Mrs. Dominic Russo for exactly 1 year. A fake marriage. A business transaction. No feelings, no shared bed, just public appearances and feigned devotion. The bedroom door clicked open, and Dominic stepped in. Even in the sprawling, cavernous master suite, his presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. He wore a midnight blue Brioni tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders flawlessly. His dark hair was meticulously styled, but his eyes, a piercing, icy blue, remained as predatory as ever. "The car is waiting," Dominic said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded immediate obedience. "I'm ready," Natalie replied, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. She turned to face him, suppressing the instinct to step back. Dominic's gaze swept over her, clinical and detached. "You look the part. Remember the narrative tonight. We met in Aspen 6 months ago. We kept it quiet to avoid the press. You are hopelessly in love with me, and I am entirely devoted to you. The men we are dining with tonight can smell fear, Natalie. They can smell a lie. Do not falter." "I know the script, Dominic," she said, lifting her chin defensively. "I'm doing this for Oliver. You don't have to worry about my performance." "I worry about everything," he corrected, smoothly stepping closer. The faint scent of Tom Ford tobacco and vanilla reached her. He reached out his large, calloused hand, brushing against her collarbone as he adjusted the heavy diamond necklace. His touch was unexpectedly warm, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. "The men at this gala are sharks. Vincent Costa will be there." Natalie froze. The name alone made her stomach churn. Vincent was the heir to the Costa family, the man who had ordered her brother's legs broken before Dominic intervened. "You said the debt was settled." "It is. But Vincent is a proud, petty man. He views my intervention as an insult to his authority." Dominic explained, his eyes locking onto hers. "Stay by my side. Do not speak to him. If he approaches you, smile and walk away." You belong to the Russo family now. That name is an invisible shield, but only if you stay within its bounds. He offered his arm. Natalie took it, feeling the solid, terrifying muscle beneath the expensive wool. They descended in the private elevator to the underground garage, where an armored Mercedes Maybach awaited, flanked by 2 black SUVs filled with Dominic's heavily armed enforcers. The ride to the Waldorf Astoria was suffocating in its silence. The city lights blurred past the tinted bulletproof glass. Natalie's heart hammered against her ribs. She was a kindergarten teacher from Brooklyn, thrust into a world where billions of dollars and human lives were traded over a glass of vintage scotch. When they arrived, the flashbulbs of the paparazzi blinded her. Dominic's hand immediately went to the small of her back, a possessive grounding force. He smiled for the cameras, a perfect, charming smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. He played the part of the smitten billionaire, flawlessly leaning in to whisper in her ear. "Smile, mia cara," he murmured, his breath hot against her neck, sending a confusing jolt of electricity through her veins. "The world is watching." Natalie forced a radiant smile, leaning into his solid frame, as they walked up the red-carpeted stairs and entered the opulent ballroom. The gala was a sea of haute couture, sparkling jewels, and dangerous men hiding behind polite society. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. Dominic introduced her to politicians, Wall Street hedge fund managers, and men with thick accents and scarred knuckles who kissed her hand and offered their congratulations. Dominic was a master chess player, maneuvering her through the room, ensuring they painted the perfect picture of marital bliss. But a fake marriage in the Mafia is a house of cards, and all it takes is one gust of wind to bring it crashing down. The air in the grand ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, roasted truffles, and quiet hostility. Natalie stood near a towering ice sculpture, sipping a glass of Dom Perignon she barely tasted. For a brief moment, she was alone. Dominic's underboss, a ruthless man named Christian, had pulled Dominic aside. There was an issue at the port of Newark. A shipment of untraceable weapons had been flagged by a customs agent on the Costa family payroll. It was a deliberate provocation. Dominic had squeezed her hand, kissed her cheek for the onlookers, and told her to stay exactly where she was. 2 minutes, he had promised before disappearing into the crowd of tuxedos. 3 minutes passed. Then 5. Natalie set her half-empty flute on a passing waiter's tray and decided to retreat to the powder room to catch her breath. The sheer anxiety of maintaining the charade was exhausting. She navigated the perimeter of the ballroom, slipping through a set of heavy mahogany doors that led to a quieter, dimly lit corridor. She didn't notice the 2 large men detach themselves from the shadows and follow her. As she reached for the brass handle of the restroom door, a hand clamped down on her wrist. It wasn't gentle. It was a vice grip that made her gasp in pain. "Mrs. Russo," a slick, venomous voice purred. "Running away from the party so soon." Natalie spun around, her heart lodging in her throat. Standing before her was Vincent Costa. He was younger than Dominic, dressed in a flashy velvet blazer, his dark hair slicked back. He had a cruel, asymmetrical smile and eyes that looked entirely dead. Flanking him were 2 massive enforcers blocking the hallway back to the ballroom. "Mr. Costa," Natalie managed to say, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Let go of my arm." Vincent chuckled, tightening his grip. "You've got a lot of nerve playing house with Dominic Russo. You look good in his diamonds, I'll give you that. But a pig in a silk dress is still a pig, Natalie." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to yank her arm away, but his grip was unyielding. "Don't insult my intelligence," Vincent hissed, stepping into her personal space. He smelled of cheap cigars and sour alcohol. Your degenerate brother owed me $3 million. Russo swoops in, pays the tab, and suddenly you're his blushing bride. The commission might buy this fairy tale, but I don't. Russo is using you to secure his seat at the head of the table. You're nothing but a pawn. My marriage is none of your business. If you don't let me go, my husband will make you regret it. She threatened, channeling every ounce of Dominic's cold authority. Vincent threw his head back and laughed. Your husband Russo is currently dealing with a little mess I orchestrated at the docks. He's distracted, and frankly I feel robbed. Your brother's debt was mine to collect. You were supposed to be mine to collect. Panic spiked in Natalie's chest. The debt was paid. Money is boring, Vincent sneered, reaching up with his free hand to trace a finger down her cheek. She flinched violently. Pride, however, is priceless. Russo embarrassed me by stepping into my territory. So I'm going to take something of his. A tit for a tat. Grab her, Vincent barked to his men. Take her down the service elevator to the garage. We're going for a ride. The two enforcers lunged forward. Natalie screamed, kicking out wildly, her designer heel catching one of the men in the shin. He grunted, backhanding her across the face. The force of the blow sent her crashing against the wall, the world spinning in flashes of white and grey. The taste of copper flooded her mouth. As the man reached down to haul her up by her hair, a chilling metallic click echoed through the corridor. The heavy mahogany doors at the end of the hall hadn't just opened, they had been kicked off their hinges. Dominic Russo stood in the archway. The charming billionaire was gone. In his place was the apex predator of the New York underworld. His tuxedo jacket was pushed back, his hand gripped loosely around a silenced Heckler & Koch USP tactical pistol, leveled directly at Vincent's chest. Christian stood just behind him, similarly armed. The silence in the hallway was absolute, deafening, and lethal. "Take your hands off my wife," Dominic said. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a deadly whisper that seemed to freeze the very air in the corridor. Vincent froze, his arrogant smirk faltering for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "Dominic, we were just having a friendly chat. She slipped I was having my men help her up. You have exactly 3 seconds to step away from her. Vincent or your father is going to be planning a closed-casket funeral tomorrow," Dominic replied, stepping slowly down the hallway. One of Vincent's enforcers made the fatal mistake of reaching inside his jacket for his weapon. Puffed. Puffed. 2 suppressed shots coughed from Dominic's gun. The enforcer collapsed backward, twin red blossoms blooming on his chest, dead before he hit the carpet. Natalie screamed, scrambling away from the falling body. Vincent staggered back, his face draining of color. "Are you out of your mind? Russo, you just shot a made man. You start a war over a contract whore." Dominic didn't look at Vincent. His icy blue eyes locked onto Natalie, who was trembling against the wall, blood trickling from her split lip. A terrifying, violent darkness passed over Dominic's face when he saw her blood. He lowered the gun slightly, extending his left hand toward her. "Hide behind me," Dominic ordered, his voice suddenly stripped of its cold detachment, replaced by a fierce, undeniable protectiveness. Natalie didn't hesitate. She scrambled to her feet, kicking off her heels, and ran to him. As she ducked behind his broad, towering frame, Dominic shifted his stance, effectively shielding her body with his own. She grabbed the back of his suit jacket, her hands shaking violently, breathing in the scent of his cologne. For the first time since this nightmare began standing behind a murderer, she felt entirely safe. Dominic raised the gun back to Vincent's forehead. "She is my wife," Dominic stated, every syllable dripping with lethal intent. "Contract or not, she carries my name. And you just drew blood from a Russo. The commission won't stand for this," Vincent stammered, raising his hands, his bravado entirely shattered. "You shoot me, and the truce is over. The streets will run red." "Let them," Dominic said softly. He took aim, his finger tightening on the trigger. The fake marriage was over. The rules of the contract were dead. Vincent had just awoken a monster, and as Natalie clung to Dominic's back, she realized with a terrifying jolt that her fake husband was willing to burn the entire city to ash just to keep her safe. Christian's heavy hand clamped down on Dominic's shoulder, just as the syndicate leader's finger tightened against the cold steel of the trigger. "Boss, wait!" Christian warned, his voice low and laced with a rare, desperate urgency. "If you put a bullet in his skull right here, right now, in the middle of the Waldorf Astoria, the Commission will have your head. We lose the entire eastern seaboard. We lose the port. You lose everything you built." Dominic's chest heaved, his tailored Brioni tuxedo jacket straining against his taut muscles. The icy blue of his eyes remained locked onto Vincent Costa, who was practically hyperventilating against the ornate silk wallpaper, his bravado completely dissolved into pathetic, shivering terror. The silence in the corridor was shattered only by the ragged, terrified breathing of Natalie, who was clutching the fabric of Dominic's jacket, as if it were her only tether to reality. "He touched my wife," Dominic whispered. The words were not an explanation. They were a death sentence, temporarily placed on hold. "I know," Christian murmured, keeping his gaze firmly fixed on Vincent's remaining enforcer, his own weapon unyielding. "But we do this on our terms, not in a hotel hallway surrounded by politicians and feds." For an agonizing 5 seconds, the fate of the New York underworld balanced on the edge of a razor. Finally, Dominic slowly lowered the Heckler & Koch USP tactical pistol. He didn't holster it, but the immediate threat of execution passed. Vincent let out a pathetic, shuddering breath, sliding an inch down the wall. "You have precisely 1 hour to vanish from this city. Vincent!" Dominic commanded, his voice returning to its characteristic gravelly baritone. "If I see your face in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, or Staten Island, if I hear your name whispered in the private rooms of Rouse or the back tables of Sparks Steakhouse, I will not just kill you. I will dismantle the Costa family, brick by brick. I will wipe your legacy from the earth." Vincent didn't utter a single word. He practically scrambled over the bleeding corpse of his enforcer, fleeing down the service corridor like a frightened rat escaping a sinking ship. Christian immediately signaled for their security detail to handle the gruesome cleanup, efficiently securing the hallway before the gala's oblivious attendees could wander into the bloodbath. Dominic turned around. The terrifying, murderous aura completely vanished the instant his eyes met Natalie's bruised face. Her lip was split a thin line of crimson, stark against her pale skin. Her emerald silk gown was slightly torn at the shoulder, the multi-million-dollar Cartier diamonds sitting heavy and mocking against her collarbone. Without a word, Dominic holstered his weapon, shucked off his tuxedo jacket, and draped it gently over her trembling shoulders. The scent of Tom Ford tobacco and vanilla enveloped her once more, grounding her racing mind. "Christian," Dominic ordered, wrapping his arm firmly around Natalie's waist, pressing her securely against his side. "Bring the Sikorsky S-76 helicopter to the East River helipad. We are not returning to the penthouse. We are going to the Montauk estate. And call Dr. Orris. I want him waiting when we land." "Understood." Christian nodded, pulling out a heavily encrypted satellite phone. "What about the situation at the Newark port?" "Leave it," Dominic growled, leading Natalie down the private elevator shaft reserved for elite VIPs. "Someone inside our crew tipped off the Costas. Only 3 men knew about that shipment's exact arrival time. Find out which one of them is the rat, and do not let them out of your sight." The helicopter ride over the glittering New York skyline was a blur to Natalie. She sat strapped into the plush leather seat, wrapped entirely in Dominic's jacket, staring blankly at the dark ocean below. The fake marriage, the contract, her brother Oliver's gambling debt, it all felt incredibly distant, replaced by the shocking, undeniable reality that this terrifying man had just risked his entire empire to protect her. When they landed at the heavily fortified, sprawling estate in Montauk, the ocean wind whipped violently across the tarmac. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter with tactical rifles, their faces hidden behind black balaclavas. Inside the estate was a fortress of concrete and glass, isolated from the rest of the world. Dr. Orris, an underground physician who had stitched up countless bullet wounds for the syndicate, meticulously cleaned and bandaged the cut on Natalie's face. Once he departed, Dominic entered the dimly lit bedroom. He had changed out of his blood-spattered tuxedo shirt into a simple black Henley, looking less like a billionaire and more like the lethal street soldier he had been a decade ago. He sat on the edge of the massive mahogany bed, handing her a glass of aged Macallan whiskey. "Drink. It will settle your nerves." Natalie took a small sip, the amber liquid, burning pleasantly down her throat. She looked at him, truly looking past the terrifying reputation for the first time. "You almost started a mob war tonight, over a contract." "You are not a contract," Dominic said softly, his blue eyes intense and unwavering in the dim light. "The moment I put my ring on your finger, the contract ceased to exist. You are under my protection. You are mine." "It was supposed to be fake," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "A year of public appearances to satisfy the commission." "Nothing more." Dominic reached out his large fingers, gently tracing the unbruised side of her jawline. His touch was incredibly tender, a shocking contrast to the violence she had witnessed him unleash only hours prior. "The commission wanted me to have a weakness. They demanded I take a wife so they could hold something over my head. But they miscalculated Natalie. You are not my weakness. You are my absolute breaking point. Vincent Costa learned that tonight. The rest of them will learn it tomorrow." Natalie leaned slightly into his touch, her heart hammering against her ribs, no longer out of fear, but from a profound, terrifying realization. She was falling in love with a monster who would gladly burn down the world to keep her warm. The next morning, the Montauk estate became a war room. The massive dining table was covered in blueprints, encrypted laptops, and photographs of Costa family operations. Christian arrived just before noon, looking grim and exhausted, accompanied by 2 enforcers, hauling a battered, bloody man between them. It was Lorenzo, one of Dominic's most trusted capos, a man who had managed the Brooklyn territory for 5 years. Dominic stood at the head of the table, his face an impenetrable mask of cold fury. Natalie watched from the upper balcony, hidden in the shadows, unable to look away. "Lorenzo," Dominic said, quietly, pouring himself a cup of black coffee, "you have been with this family for a decade. I paid for your daughter's medical treatments at Mount Sinai. I bought your mother her house in Bay Ridge. And yet Christian tells me you met with Vincent Costa at a private club in Soho 3 days ago. You sold out the Newark shipment." Lorenzo spat blood onto the polished hardwood floor, his eyes wild with desperation. "Vincent promised me the Brooklyn docks. Dominic, you were going soft, taking a fake wife, playing the respectable businessman. The commission is whispering. They think you're weak. Vincent was going to make his move with or without me." "I see," Dominic replied smoothly. He didn't shout. He didn't show anger. That was what made him so utterly terrifying. Did Vincent mention his plan to abduct my wife last night? Lorenzo hesitated, his eyes darting nervously to Christian. He said he was going to take her to leverage you. Make you surrender the eastern seaboard. Dominic set his coffee cup down with a sharp, echoing clink. Christian, execute him. Before Lorenzo could even scream for mercy, a single muffled shot echoed through the dining room. Lorenzo collapsed instantly. Natalie gasped, slapping a hand over her mouth, stumbling backward into the shadows of the balcony. Dominic's head snapped upward, his sharp eyes catching the slight movement. He dismissed his men with a wave of his hand, leaving Christian to dispose of the body, and walked slowly up the grand staircase. When he found her in the hallway, she was shaking her back pressed hard against the wall. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space, his expression softening marginally. This is the reality of my world, Natalie. Dominic stated, his voice laced with a strange, heavy sorrow. There is no courtroom. There is no jury. There is only loyalty and death. If you wish to run, I will give you a new identity, $5 million, and a safe passage to Europe. Oliver's debt remains paid. You are entirely free to go. Natalie stared at the blood on his hands, then looked up into the icy blue depths of his eyes. She thought of her quiet, predictable life in Brooklyn, the kindergarten classroom, the endless struggle to pay bills. Then she thought of the way Dominic had stood between her and Vincent's gun, offering his own life without a second of hesitation. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and reached out, wrapping her hands around his large, blood-stained fingers. I am not running, she said, her voice surprisingly steady, echoing through the silent corridor. I am a Russo. A slow, dangerous smile curved Dominic's lips. It was the first genuine smile she had ever seen him wear. He pulled her flush against his chest, burying his face in her hair. Then God help anyone who tries to take you from me. Thunder cracked across the skyline 3 days later. The commission demanded an immediate sit-down. The meeting was arranged at a private underground bunker beneath an abandoned plant in Brooklyn. It was a cold tomb where truces were brokered and death warrants signed. Dominic prepared with clinical precision. He wore a custom charcoal suit, checking his concealed weaponry. Natalie watched him from the edge of the bed, anxiety gnawing at her stomach. They are walking you into a trap, she warned, clutching the sheets. Christian said Vincent rallied support from the Genovese faction. I know, Dominic replied, slipping a combat knife into his ankle sheath. Vincent thinks he is laying an ambush. But Lorenzo is dead, Natalie pointed out. Exactly. Dominic smiled darkly. Before Christian disposed of his phone, we sent Vincent one final message. We told him I would attend with only 2 guards, bringing you to prove the legitimacy of our marriage. Natalie gasped. You are using yourself as bait. I am using the illusion of weakness, Dominic corrected. He kissed her knuckles. You are staying here guarded by 50 of my men. When I walk into that bunker, Vincent will expect an easy victory. He will find a slaughterhouse. The bunker was humid. 5 elderly men sat around a circular iron table puffing cigars. These were the heads of the commission. Dominic descended the metal staircase. He was alone. No guards, just one man walking into a den of wolves. Dominic, rasped Don Carmine. You come alone. Where is your bride? Where is your respect? Before Dominic could answer, heavy steel doors swung open. Vincent Costa marched in, flanked by 12 heavily armed mercenaries carrying automatic rifles. The commission bosses did not flinch. They had authorized the ambush. Your reign ends tonight, Russo. Vincent declared, a cruel smile stretching across his face. The commission voted. You are out. Once you bleed out, I am sending my men to collect your little fake wife. She will beg for me." Dominic stood perfectly still. He did not look at the mercenaries. He looked directly at Vincent, his icy eyes filled with grim amusement. "Vincent," Dominic sighed, "did you honestly believe I would leave my wife exposed?" Vincent frowned. "What?" "I own the man who installed the ventilation system here," Dominic stated smoothly. "I own the cops patrolling the streets above. Most importantly, I own the mercenaries standing behind you." Vincent spun around in shock. The 12 armed men had silently shifted their rifles. They were aiming directly at Vincent and the 5 bosses. The bunker erupted. Vincent screamed, reaching for his pistol, but Dominic was infinitely faster. He drew his weapon and fired a single shot. The bullet struck Vincent squarely in the chest, dropping him instantly to the cold concrete. The commission bosses raised their hands in terrified surrender. Dominic walked slowly toward the bleeding air. "I told you," Dominic whispered. "If you touched her, I would wipe your legacy from the earth." He turned his terrifying gaze to the trembling bosses. "From this moment forward, there is no commission. There is only the Russo Syndicate. Do we have an understanding?" They nodded frantically. Dominic had orchestrated a masterclass in ruthless efficiency, crowning himself king to secure the safety of a woman he was only supposed to pretend to love. When Dominic returned to the estate as the sun began to rise, Natalie was waiting on the balcony. She saw the exhaustion in his posture, but also the undeniable victory in his eyes. He wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face in her neck. "It is over," Dominic murmured. "Vincent is gone. You are safe." Natalie cupped his face. "And what about our contract? What happens when the year is up?" Dominic reached into his pocket, pulling out the notarized legal document. Without breaking eye contact, he pulled a silver lighter from his trousers, sparked the flame, and held it to the corner of the paper. They watched in silence as the contract burned to ash, scattering over the ocean waves. There is no contract," Dominic vowed, pulling her in for a fierce kiss. "Only my wife, until my last breath." Did this gripping tale of danger, fake vows, and ruthless Mafia romance keep you on the edge of your seat? The underworld is full of dark secrets and unexpected love stories waiting to be uncovered. If you loved Dominic and Natalie's thrilling journey from a forced contract to an unbreakable bond, make sure to like this video, share it with your fellow romance drama fans, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, thrilling new stories every single week right now.